What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy Hughes, and did someone order a get right mail in the game for Tulane? Because if you did, I think you'd be really pleased with their Week 12 victory, beating the FAU Owls 24-8 to remain undefeated in conference play, go 10-1 on the year. Willie Fritz becomes the first coach in Tulane history to coach back-to-back teams with 10 or more wins. Michael Pratt leads yet another category here at Tulane, becoming the all-time leader in passing yards with his 37-yard bomb to Yokeith Brown. That was the coolest way to break a record ever. And we all know that he broke that record on passing touchdowns earlier this year. He's up there in rushing as well for being a quarterback. This just was a game where it felt like everything that really needed to click on all cylinders did exactly that. The offense comes out, they score on their first two opening possessions. They're 4 or 5 in the red zone on this game. And I don't really care how the game ended. When you really look at the score, I mean, yes, FAU scored 8 points. They did not get those points until the fourth quarter. That is 2 weeks in a row now where you've seen the defense pitch a 3-quarter shutout. I'm sorry, it's not 2 weeks in a row. They did it against ECU. It was Tulsa that they allowed a little more points, but that's 2 games in a 3-game stretch where you've just pitched a shutout through 3 quarters. And coming into this game, the number one duty on this defense was shutting down LaJohntay Wester, who leads the nation in receptions. Prior to this game, he had 93 going into it. Again, for comparison's sake, Lawrence Keyes, who leads this team for Tulane, at least he did before this last 2-week stretch, he had 33 receptions up till that point to LaJohntay Wester's 93. That is just a complete domination of your offensive snaps to a guy that, you know, he's not that large. I always go back to when Tulane played ECU last year. They did not have this size at receiver. CJ Johnson alongside a few other of those guys where they were just massive bodies out there at wide receiver. And I remember how impressive it was that Tulane, despite not having the size battle there, was able to shut them down. And so going into this game, you're kind of thinking, okay, well, he's 5'11". He's not that big. He's super quick. He's able to line up at every slot on the field. He's able to do motion, rushes the ball quite a bit, and really just their offense starts and stops with him. Going into this week, we knew that was going to be really the primary goal of this defense, and a lot of that responsibility falling on Cam Pettislow's shoulders as that anchor role, just because he's, you know, able to switch sides of the field. You can't really do that at cornerback, and being able to follow him into the backfield. You see Cam Pettislow blitz. You see him pick up O-linemen on one-on-one blocks, which goes to show you how much teams fear his abilities. And really looking at his numbers in this game, I mean, he had 86 yards on 11 catches, but that's really nothing, all things considered. I mean, to have, again, 11 receptions after having 93 all year and not really that much to show for it, including a touchdown to show for it. They only scored 1 on the day to another wide receiver. It's very Belichickian and shutting down their best player and making them beat you with less good guys on the field. And that's essentially what you saw happen on that touchdown drive. LaJohntay Wester only had 2 receptions on that entire drive. You saw them really trying to run the ball almost quite stubbornly at that point on this defense. But to me, the defense really had nothing more to prove after let me just get these numbers. It was the 3rd drive for FAU. They go on a 19-play drive. 19 plays. I mean, that is ridiculous. As much as we talk about Tulane's 4th quarter dominating plays, I've never seen anything in my life like that. It took 9 minutes and 16 seconds off the clock, went for 73 yards, and this defense held them and turned it over on downs. I said this after the Tulsa game last week, where to me, if you're able to really hold pat and you allow that touchdown at the end of the game, what was more important to me was that they stopped the 2-point conversion. Now, in this game, they didn't make that 2-point stop, but they had not allowed any points on the board up until that point, and they had a lead where that wasn't going to tie the game. Not to say that they were checked out of it in any way, but I think they were also just a little exhausted to an extent when they allowed that touchdown. But again, to just be able to hold a team like that, shut them down, they allowed them to get to the red zone, and they were switched quarterbacks midway through that drive as well. We knew that they were going to bring in that other quarterback a little more in the red zone, but he came in a little earlier than expected. And that's 2 weeks in a row now where this Tulane defense has had to deal with in-game changing of the hand at quarterback. And it's just easier said than done to be able to readjust on the fly like that. But to me, this was really the game that mattered for the defense. Their ability to shut down the run. We know their ability to make the stops when it counts, but Can they shut down a true number one receiver in coverage? And honestly, they really did. Again, they had 24 passes thrown to 7 different receivers, 11 of those going to LaJohntay Wester. It's just not the dominating game that you really need for a win against this Tulane team. And you're just continuing to see teams really pull all these tricks out of their playbook. They ran a set on that drive where they had 3 running backs out there at once. I mean, it's just a wild type of personnel, and the coverage to me was so sharp for Tulane. I'm going to get to the second half touchdown drive in a second, but again, for a team that isn't perfect, they make the most critical stops. And this was, to me, the most dominating offensive performance, again, since that week 1 win, where they just felt in control, in command the whole time, despite all of the changes on the offensive line, despite the fact that they were still missing Lawrence Keys and Jaquan Jackson. It goes to show you how much, how difficult winning really is, how much of a margin of error it really comes down to, and how 1 or 2 players can really just make a huge difference there. Just by getting Keith Brown back and Chris Carter, the way that they were able to employ personnel was just so different. You saw them using Shedro Lewis, I thought, a lot more creatively. He had 2 receptions as well as 4 carries. Mekhi Hughes also had 2 receptions, but Tulane also spread the ball out to 7 different receivers, 2 of those being the running backs on the day. But Chris Brazzell was basically shut down in last week's game. They had to run a ton of 11 personnel, having that 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers out there, and oftentimes lining Alex Bauman out as a receiver, not tight on the line, not in the offset I formation, not in the run blocking that we're used to seeing from him. And this game, it was just night and day in the way that they were able to employ personnel. They used 13 personnel a lot in this game. You saw so much more of Reggie Brown out there with Alex Bauman and Chris Carter. You saw them play Carter and Bauman off each other for that second touchdown by Chris Carter, the first one being one of the wildest touchdown catches I've seen. Again, he was on the other side of the field for me, but just to watch his calmness while that ball was just bobbling in the air, to have the awareness to keep his feet perfectly in bounds until he made that catch. It was just an A+ job well done. But on that touchdown, the second one, the way that they ran Bauman and Carter, all of the coverage went to Alex Bauman, also because they've been able to get him so involved in the receiving game that it left Chris Carter wide open on the line. And I don't know how much I believe in holding tricks close to your chest, saving them for the end of the year, because you might not get there, all things considered, even though you are guaranteed those 12 games. But it did just feel, seeing Garrett Mamahat go out there and throw a pass where it didn't work out, but just the effort there alone, and the idea that there was a creative trick that we had yet to see all year long. And to go, again, 4 of 5 in the red zone, 3 of 4 on 4th down. That is aggressive. The amount of times Tulane's gone on 4th down early on in a game, it just shows how much they really emphasize, I think, those strong starts. And you saw that again happen against FAU. And yes, there are lulls in the game, but again, style points are just not something that you look at while you're playing a football game of, oh, it'll be really nice to get an extra touchdown here so we can run off into halftime with a little boost. I said this in the Memphis game. A lot of the time, it's just better to regroup, get yourself back out there. As much as you believe in halftime adjustments here or there, it just feels like something has clicked for this team coming out of halftime, because those third quarter starts or slow starts, what have you, completely absent these last couple of weeks. Again, I think you could say they played a little conservative towards the end of games, but they went up early. And again, they missed a field goal in this game. The wind was blowing pretty sufficiently at this point. So on a 39-yarder, the wind was blowing in the direction with which, he missed that field goal, but keep saying 2-score game on the broadcast. And I get that that's mathematically correct, but this was a team that, again, until the fourth quarter had allowed 0 points up until the day. So if nothing more than a mathematical possibility, why on earth would you even expect that they would be able to do that 2 more times in a row? The amount of times that they held them to 3 and out, and again, just shut down a true number 1 wide receiver in coverage, they're going to need to be able to do that tenfold against UTSA next week. And I know that there was a little bit of there's always that worry where you overlook a game in favor of the next opponent. And it's safe to say that that's the last thing Tulane did in this matchup. Again, bringing out just such creative packages on offense and really just continuing the strong mental toughness on defense. And that to me is really what wins you football games. And I think by the end of this game, you really saw just a championship caliber team solidify itself in Tulane, where they have this next man up mentality. They have this mentality of it just being a team effort, that it's never just about one guy. And the guys that were thrown into the fire last week had really good games this week. Like Bryce Bohannon had a huge play on, I believe it was 4th down for 22 yards. It was either 3rd or 4th down, and he definitely had a 4th down conversion. Either way, to have that on 2 of your targets, or 2 of your 3 targets of the day, to have those 2 receptions and one of them be a key conversion for this team, it makes it difficult to scheme against Tulane. To get Shedro Lewis involved where you have Mekhi Hughes out there, we saw it a few games ago where they handed the ball off to Lewis and then Mekhi Hughes blocked for him downfield. This game, they had him in motion, tossed it to Lewis, and then same thing with Hughes blocking upfield. Again, it's really good to see these things start to be built on and start to be really solidified heading into this kind of final stretch, if you will, where, yes, there's technically only one more regular season game, but if you think that Tulane's not, again, in strong contention to play in this conference championship, which is just it's a wild thing where Tulane has done all that they could do all year long, and it's all going to come down to this final game. And to me, this is the thesis statement of that 1-0 mentality, because it literally doesn't matter that Tulane's been undefeated in conference play, that they are 10-1, that their only loss is to, a ranked Ole Miss team. It matters that they're in a 3-way tie and they're going to be breaking that one way or the other this weekend. So it's easier said than done to say this is a championship caliber team, knowing that, again, just a few bad bounces here and there could end in a very disappointing fashion for Tulane. But if you're looking at the way that they've fought through every conference game this year, that they've dealt with struggles on the field, in injury situations, not recovering onside kicks, which they were able to recover one in this game and not have to deal with that shortened field for the defense, to not have that much luck in your favor, to not have injuries be going your way, and to feel this much like they are in command and control going into the final game of the year, it almost feels like this season has just kind of flown by, and what this team has accomplished almost taken for granted now that we're kind of at this finish line and saying, oh, well, I guess style points don't matter. Well, they mattered apparently for a few weeks, just not to the guys on the field. But again, I think that this really shut down any doubters and any concerns that you might have about this team, injury or not. That mental toughness and character miles ahead of whatever personnel is on the field. I suppose it really doesn't matter that much, but something I just wanted to bring up was, I chart the drives, even though I'm there for the game, and I rewatch them usually the night of or the next day. I like to sit down at my computer, pull up the drive charts just to get a really good sense of things. It stuck out to me the last 2 weeks in a row how many times the opponent has had 4 play drives, because 3 and outs get the deserved attention that they get, but there's been more than one drive, both in this game and in last week's game, where the other team gets a first down on the first play, and then the defense holds them to 3 and out after that fact. So it's not technically a 3 and out, but it all but is in terms of time of possession and what they're allowing other teams to do. And you saw them again end this half after Tulane punted the ball after that 19-play drive where they turned it over on those downs. And to me, it just looked like the offense was almost a little too cold after being on the sideline. I mean, that's 9 minutes of game time, probably 30 minutes of actual waiting to go back on the field there. And then again, there's a 4-play drive to end the half. Then they hold them to 3 and out to start the second half. Tulane scores their 3rd touchdown of the day to go up 21-0. And at this point, yeah, I think it is safe to say that they could kind of go into cruise control because your defense is playing the way that they do. They held them to another 3 and out after that touchdown. Tulane kicks a field goal. They go up 24-0. And then the last points of the day are scored by FAU on that touchdown drive where they scored. There's 8:58 left on the clock. No points were scored in the final 9 minutes of this game, if you will. Yes, Valentino Ambrosio again missed that field goal in kicking into the wind, calling a timeout again, although it did look like the first one was going to get blocked. But I do just want to say about Valentino Ambrosio, I have never seen a kicker be less phased by missing kicks than I have Valentino Ambrosio. Yes, I've only seen 2 on the sideline, but you watch games, everyone watches football, and you could just see body language of guys after they miss a kick. You could see them start to get a little more frantic in their head on the sideline, kicking into the net, sometimes to an incessant degree. You never see that from Valentino. You really just don't see him break a sweat over these things. And that to me is the most important attribute to have in a kicker outside of accuracy, which he, all but is. Again, we're talking about kicking a 39-yarder into the wind. Yes, you could argue that, or I'm sorry, with the wind going a little to the left, I guess you could argue that, in the NFL, you're expected to make those kicks, but we're not in the NFL. And again, we're talking about a team that doesn't need those points at the end of the day. So we're kind of just talking about a nothing burger, if you will. But just to miss that field goal and then for the defense to get an interception on the next drive. And that drive was a sack by Jared Small, a sack by Keith Cooper. They allowed LeJohntay Wester 7 yards on a 3rd and 21. And then on 4th down, DJ Douglas pretty much ends this game with an interception. I mean, it stuck out to me in this game too, is just how impressive all 3 levels of this defense performed. I mean, 5 sacks. And this was a team that really was getting to the quarterback early on in the year, kind of had a little bit of a slow stretch here and there. That's not to say they haven't been affecting the quarterback with hurries and hits here and there, which they definitely have. It's not been a comfortable pocket for any opposing team. But going into halftime, Willie Fritz told me, and I can certify that, I'll save that rant for the end, but they wanted to see more out of Tulane's pass rush. And again, they ended this game with 5 sacks, to have back-to-back sacks on that drive when they needed to have a takeaway in that interception when they needed to. I mean, this is a championship defense. It's one that has a pass rush that's producing. My player of the game was Jared Small at linebacker, and it was one of my harder players of the game. Sometimes it's difficult because the defense sometimes doesn't play that well. And then sometimes they played almost too well that I really found it difficult to pick out a guy. And I was really kind of tied between him and Cam Pettisclo, only because I knew the load of what Cam Pettisclo was tasked with really having a lot of coverage responsibilities on LeJohntay Wester and playing a huge role in shutting him down for a lot of this game. But Jared Small, to me, again, that linebacker group shouldn't be as good as they are on the heels of Nick Anderson and Dorian Williams, and to lose their starter in Corey Pratt in week 1, have a new coach and defensive coordinator all in one in Shield Wood, and those linebackers are just producing. I mean, Tyler Grubbs had a sack. Jared Small had so many run tackles in this game, and you saw him really fair in coverage quite a bit as well. And then to talk about the coverage, Kentrell Webb stuck out to me in this game. He's a guy that comes in sometimes at one of those safety roles. He could play both boundary and strong and free safety, if you will. He comes downhill to make those tackles, but so do all of these defensive backs. And I just keep going back to, again, Pro Day, where I was talking with Willie Fritz on our ESPN Plus broadcast about losing Lummy Young and just all those run stopping ability at safety. And that was really going to be a point of emphasis going into this year. So to have your secondary members be hitting these running backs in the backfield, tackling for loss. I think Tulane had 8 tackles for loss in this game to FAU's 3. And going into this game, FAU had 15 tackles for loss. This was a team that really, that's what they relied on, and then relied on their number 1 receiver. And Tulane evaded both of those things. They were able to make it work. Michael Pratt makes history, and good for him. I mean, honest to God, that kid has been through more on the field than I think I will see a quarterback take in terms of hits, in terms of going through that 2-10 year. And it's really just kind of settling with me now, just how incredible of a run this has been for Michael Pratt, for this Tulane team, just over these last 3 years. I've been telling people this just, in storytelling on the side, but we did not take a plane ride home in my first year after a game that we'd won. Our 2 wins came against Morgan State when we were at Legion Field in Alabama that I drove back home from. I drove back up there for the Ole Miss game, and then at home against USF in week 11. So I was very caught off guard when Sincere Haynesworth started the hullabaloo chant on the plane back from Kansas State last year, because I had no idea that was a tradition, because we had never seen it before. And it just really puts in perspective again for me how hard it is to do what Tulane has done now 2 seasons in a row. And this was always a season that mattered a lot more, right? Again, we talk about the legacy, what these guys were hoping to accomplish last year. This is their legacy. This is a culture of champions, of winners. And you heard guys come in the spring like Tyler Grubbs and say they wanted to come somewhere where it is a group of champions, and they figured out the secret to winning. And I remember turning to Steve Barrios and us kind of laughing, saying, when's the last time you heard someone come in new for Tulane say that they came here on purpose because they wanted to play for a champion and a winner? And he wasn't the only transfer that said that. Then you think about the fact that Tulane, even after the 2-10 year, and then after last season, they really have lost no one. to the transfer portal. They've only really benefited from it. It's just been incredible. And it is easier said than done to sustain the success at a G5 level when your conference sees 8 new members, 50% of the teams in it have first-time head coaches. You're picked, I believe, for the first time ever to win the American Athletic Conference in the preseason. You come in as the Cotton Bowl champions, as the one group of 5 team to go to the New Year's Six Bowl, beat the Heisman Trophy winner. Yeah, you're going to have the biggest target on your back possible. You just think about being a Tulane fan and looking at schools like Cincinnati and UCF in these previous years, realizing how big of a game that was for Tulane. Now realize that Tulane's on the other side of that coin for every team they played this year. And quite frankly, Ole Miss didn't come in here looking like they thought it was going to be a cakewalk whatsoever. I mean, this Tulane team has garnered national respect. And we could talk about rankings all we want and why teams fall after a win that was more convincing than the one they moved up for the last week. But it just doesn't matter. What matters is Tulane remains in control of their driver's seat. And every week it's been the same thing. Well, just keep winning. Tulane's done that. I don't know really what else they can do up to this point. Just puts into perspective, again, knowing that you're getting every team's best shot, that every week they've seen something on defense or for the other team's defense that hadn't been shown on film all year. For teams to be holding plays in their book this late into the year, it just goes to show how much they respected, quite frankly, fear Tulane. And they're playing a team in FAU that was, I mean, they had 4 wins on the year. They had to win out in order to be bowl eligible. And when you come into a new conference, you're trying to make that splash and make your mark, and knocking off the top dog, especially when the top dog's quarterback returns back to his hometown. That's a team that's giving it their all. Every team they played this year has given it their all. Tulane is the opposite of a trap game for every opponent. It's the one circled on every single calendar. And that, to me, is just the utmost sign of respect. And you've dealt with, again, just injuries on offense. You've had to have a running back competition for half the year. And to lose Shoddy Clayton Johnson to injury in the ECU game and have Shedro Lewis come out in the way he has, both as a runner and a receiver, now you're going into the final game of the year. Mekhi Hughes is still a spring chicken. I know that this was his lowest output yet, but to me, this was a game that for once Tulane really established the pass more so than the run. That stuck out a little bit. Maybe some of that was looking at Michael Pratt's record, because honestly, I know that people can say they don't pay attention to records as much as they want, but I mean, that was on everyone's minds going into this game. And just to get it out of the way and on such a cool pass to O'Keefe Brown, just nice to really not have to worry about that. But it's not as if Tulane was just throwing into the wind with really no game plan either. I mean, to be complete 21 of 28 passes, that's a 75% completion rate, his highest since Nichols' game in week 4. So that's all of conference play. To have your highest completion rate come out of that, and I believe the highest yardage since that time as well in the air, and to have more of it come in the air than on the ground for Tulane, it's one of those things that it's not so much a worry about the running output, and it's just a good sign that, again, just a few key members make such a difference in the passing game. So my advice to fans is enjoy this while you can, because after this season, and really on a week-by-week basis, but nothing is guaranteed, and winning is hard. Winning is extremely hard. To win the amount of games Tulane's won in the last 2 years, after winning 2 games 2 seasons prior, I feel like it's almost distorted the perception of reality for anyone that follows along with Tulane. And it's hard not to blame them, because you go from such a low to such a high. And the way that they won last year was just all of these, it just felt magical and unbelievable at times. This year, it felt believable, and you don't really get magic when you're expected to win a game. And yes, again, they've won a few games by 3 points. I continue to say that's something that just doesn't matter at the next level. It only really matters to a degree in the polls, but style points still don't matter in terms of being in your conference championship game, because ultimately that's the goal for Tulane, to go and win back-to-back conference championships. Yes, there's a rankings thing that comes in there if they end up losing the final game of the year, but Tulane has done everything they need to do this season to remain in control of their destiny, and they are in full control of that ending the year. Last year, Navy threw them kind of a Hail Mary, and you still had to go to Cincinnati and beat them. And I can't remember again if they were out or what have you, but these 3-way ties are really frustrating, especially when the teams haven't all played each other. And you really just, again, to have this fight for Tulane all year, It's not something that I'm looking forward to the conference championship, but it would certainly just feel like a letdown for these guys and the way that they have fought and clawed every single game, all 4 quarters on all 3 phases of the game. It's a team deserving of playing in the conference championship. That being said, it's a team that relies on a 1-0 mentality, and that has to happen for 1 more week in order for themselves to get there. So as much as I could say they deserve to be there, well, that 1-0 has to remain pat for 1 week running after this. But after this season, I mean, Michael Pratt should go to the draft. In terms of, the Power 5 transfer, what have you, I think what you're seeing in the NFL this year is depth really matter. Having Tommy DeVito, Tyson Bagent, Aiden O'Connell all be starting on NFL teams, when it's a success story, it's really cool. But it makes every single team in the league take a hard look at their rosters and say, are we really comfortable with QB3 being our quarterback for the remainder of the year? Because if we aren't, then we need to go out and draft someone and can't rely on the 3rd string guy that we picked up over the offseason, because we've seen several teams now have to transition to that being their starting quarterback for the remainder of the year. It's not been a surprise to me that I've seen Giant scouts at quite a bit of games for Tulane this year, and it would be hard to say that they were looking at anyone other than Michael Pratt. But scouts are watching this game just like they watched the first game. This is exactly what you need to take you to the next level at the NFL. I mean, Michael was just so precise and accurate and led his receivers. His timing was impeccable, and guys that he hasn't thrown to in a week in Keith Brown and Chris Carter, huge parts of this game, and just continuing that connection with Chris Brazzell, who was pretty much blanketed in coverage due to being very much wide receiver 1 by personnel last weekend. And just to see again them getting involved. Chris Carter, he had 7 catches before this game, but to have that connection with him and have that trust in him to go for him on 2 passing touchdowns on this day. Another Florida boy in Chris Carter, hard to ignore in this context as well. But the team, just the psychology, everything on the sideline really felt correct. And I'm going to end this just with a little diatribe, if you will, that I already posted on Twitter about sideline reporting. Going to keep it simple here, but just kind of my final thoughts on that, especially after having a game under my belt following everything that came out with Carissa Thompson. Again, I think that most of people listening to this follow me along on Twitter. If not, our X, whatever, it's Maddy Hudak _94. Probably saw the video I posted that I really was not anticipating to blow up in the way that it did on the merits of sideline reporting. Just everything that frustrated me about that conversation was just, again, the diminishing of a job description and a profession that really just gets absolutely no credit, and if anything gets ridiculed more often than not. And that was what was so damaging about those comments. I saw all this stuff about women hating on other women. I saw more support from women all around than anything else on Thursday and really through this weekend. And that to be stuck out a lot more than the negativity, where unfortunately we are responsible for our words and what we say in this industry, but really in life in general. I mean, let's just be honest here. We've all grown up knowing that words have consequences. We all came into the age, at least my generation, of social media with the reminder that anything you say or write on the internet is there forever. That was honed into our brains as the internet came about. And before Instagram, came out when we were in high school, that was a lesson I learned in elementary school. So you have a responsibility. I think just you owe it to yourself, but just to be aware. And I hate that that's something that has to be a thing. But as a woman in this industry, I always know that I hold the credibility of my fellow women on my shoulders, and it shouldn't feel that way, but it just goes to show you how easy it is for that dam to break, because I know that there are male sideline reporters out there. Most of them are former players. Some of them aren't, and it really doesn't matter. This is in no way to denigrate the males in this profession, but let's just talk about some of the commentary about, talking about what they look like, talking about being a dumb blonde, and that's what people want to see on air. That's really where the conversation devolved for me and got entirely away from the merits of sideline reporting into the merits of women in football analysis. That's where I really had to just kind of push my nose into things, because women have just as much of an opportunity and an ability to cover and analyze this sport as men do. And unless you're expecting every single play-by-play guy out there and every single color analyst to have been former football players in their lifetime, then why should it matter that women don't have experience playing football either? And for as much as I'm unable to play this sport, I talked about this, but I've gone to the scouting academy. I've learned football in a very hefty, diligent, and fundamental set where I know, again, how to scout the intricacies between a strong and a free safety versus a nickel, an anchor, a slot, whatever, versus a defensive back. I'm certified by the scouting academy to scout all of those positions out. So I'm confident relying on my football knowledge. But I think that I probably have the largest highlight reel of any sideline reporter out there, with the amount of times that Corey Glore and Steve Barrios come down to me on the field almost after every single commercial break, if they're able to kind of fit me in there. And if not, again, you save your report. And what I try to do is go, let's say I was going to comment on the coverage. So instead of giving that report in that moment, I keep that thought in my head. I go and listen to the defensive back meeting, see if I can glean anything of insight. And if I do, then I let Corey know. He throws it down to me when he has the opportunity. But I think having a strong short-term memory has been extremely critical for me. It's one that's less good than my long-term memory because of my concussion I've discussed on this podcast. But I really know when it's in a game setting that I have to retain this information as hard as possible. But, I talked about the substitutions on the offensive line multiple times throughout this podcast. There's no sideline report on the field of me noting that. What you don't see is the amount of times that I'm in Corey's ear telling him, okay, well, now Josh Remich is out at right guard. They just put Shadre Hurst there. Now he's at tackle, letting him know what the substitutions are. And not just that, letting him know what the personnel is once they get out there. So, okay, they subbed out Bryce Bohannon for Alex Bauman. Now they're in 13 personnel with 87 and 11 on the right side of the line. That's all information that oftentimes I'm giving to the booth in real time. A lot of games, there's no spotter for us up there. And I give who makes the tackle, who the reception is made to. I go and again, I give them personnel information. I let them know when they're bringing in dime defense and who was substituted out as a result. It's oftentimes one of the two linebackers for AJ Hampton, for example. But all of those little nuggets, a lot of the time, come from the sideline. Then there's just everything that, I actually say on air, which is going into those huddles and getting that type of information where, yes, I recognize that national reporters on TV that aren't covering a team on a daily basis just don't have the rapport or the ability to really get in those huddles the way that I'm able to. And I definitely recognize my privilege in Tulane allowing me to do that. And just, again, the mutual respect I truly feel at all times when I'm down there on the field. But for example, something that stuck out to me at the end of this game after Tulane allowed that touchdown, and it's one that even when I'm doing these podcasts now, I keep in mind as just examples of the mental toughness of this team, where after they allowed that touchdown drive, Jarius Monroe, who's been a huge leader all season long, I went over to the defensive backs to see kind of what the body language was, what the temperament was, him really just reminding everyone the coverage on the touchdown was good. We don't need to worry about the touchdown. It was the way they got down the field. That to me really stuck out because he was correct. If you go back and look at the touchdown that FAU threw, Cam Pettisclo was on him in coverage. It was a perfectly thrown ball with touch, just the exact correct timing to only where the receiver would be able to make the play on it. And if he didn't catch it, he didn't catch it. But it made it impossible for the defensive backs in coverage to be able to do anything other than remain in phase and play through the ball, play through the tackle, which they did. And you saw that pay off earlier in the game where Cam Pettisclo followed LaJohntay Wester and forced him out of bounds to where when he came back in and caught what might have been a touchdown, they never really got to the point of looking at whether or not the ball hit the ground or not because they had determined that he went out of bounds. But all that to say, the coverage was there all game. It was just the way that they allowed them to drive down the field and take a few bad angles in their coverage. That was what they were focusing on the sideline. And just to be able to have that immediate diagnosis and not get wrapped up in allowing points on the board, that to me shows true confidence in your unit, in your entire side of the ball and on your offense. You've never seen either side of the ball for Tulane panic because they're confident in one another and they go over to one another during games. Because the final thing I caught, and I gave this as I was running up to the press box, was that Michael Pratt, before they took the field, went over there and talked to the defensive back group as well. And then they come out on that next drive that they had the opportunity and sack, completion on third down, 3rd and 21, 7-yard completion, interception by DJ Douglas. Just exactly what you needed to ask for. But it would just feel absurd to me to not have the context that I just provided of all of the things that you heard on the sideline. And that was just one example. But all that to say, again, yeah, we can get into the merits of, okay, an injury update. How valuable is that? Well, sometimes on TV, they don't even mention some of the injuries because they haven't noticed them. That's really where I think the radio broadcast really comes in to value here, is knowing when guys aren't in when they are supposed to be. And, a lot of the time it's not an obvious injury on the field, noticing that they were changing the offensive line on almost every series and giving, again, our press box that information to be able to produce the best broadcast possible for our listeners. Sideline reporting is also a very selfless job in that it really isn't about us. Like I said, I get more airtime, I think, than any sideline reporter I know, but what my first and foremost focus is making sure that we put on a good show. And most of that is feeding information up to the booth. But again, I also host the post-game show. I have to deal with elevators that get held. FAU holds theirs for 5 minutes instead of 2 like normal fields. I had to walk up 8 flights of stairs in Cincinnati and pretty much almost threw up in a trash can by the time that I got up there. But I wouldn't trade a minute of it, because to just be able to feel the momentum on the sideline, to be able to really understand the ebbs and flows of the game and how that reverberates through the players and their body language. And more so, I think, in college than the NFL, where you're just dealing with younger guys that are also students on top of being athletes. To me, the mental part of the game is that much more difficult to keep a balance on. And having a psychology background probably helps with my, I guess, awareness of that. All of that to say, I really, in a game that I could have felt really uncomfortable and really hostile, and like my job was kind of on the line, not by anything of other than my own expectations and the pressure that I put on myself, I really felt more confident and comfortable than ever. And that to me said more about this whole sideline debacle than what initially came out about it. I think that the roar has been made by sideline reporters around the nation, and whether or not people choose to listen to that, I think people have already moved on from. And there's just definitely this camaraderie that I felt in a way that it just might be me having a placebo effect here of being aware that our profession was kind of under attack. But, going over to Smacker Miles and just talking one-on-one, just sideline reporter to sideline reporter, it's something that I might not have felt as comfortable doing in my previous seasons. But I hope that everyone comes out of this whole debacle more confident in themselves than ever, and knowing that, yes, your words matter, but if you use them in the right way, you can really make a difference in this industry, be it on air during a broadcast or making your own opportunities like this on a podcast. I just hope that this doesn't, again, bring women down in this industry, and that if anything, it shines a light on how opportunities for us in this sport are more important than ever. And I'm just super grateful that I have such an opportunity. I have such a great broadcast crew. I have a great football team to cover with a program that is as open as Tulane, and a head coach that, again, it's never something I've ever even wondered about maybe having to do. It's just been that far out of the realm of possibility for me. And this fan base for the overwhelming support that y'all gave me. I just hope that we keep that energy going up for this Tulane team heading into week 13 on Black Friday. They deserve it more than ever. And if you're in this area and you have nothing to do on Friday, please come to this game, because you're missing out on good football. And that's something that the rest of the state can't guarantee at this point, especially the NFL. And these guys really have just earned, it's senior night for them too. So it's your last chance potentially to see a lot of these guys play at home. You hope that it's not, but this is an empty stadium. That's really not, it just sucks for the guys. And I know that it's Black Friday. I know that it's impossible to get a full house when you have majority of a student body that's out of state, and it's kind of getting the local fan base going. But if you followed along this long, this is a team that's worth watching, and let's all show up for Black Friday at 2:30 to send these guys out in the regular season with a bang. And with that, y'all, I will see you with my preview episode of said Black Friday game coming out same day of the game on Friday.